Well, let's see. He graduated from Loyola Marymount University in LA in 1980. So
Okay.
I'd be around
Okay,
20 then.
okay, so he's about,
He was
he's
born
about my
October
age.
6th, 1957.
Okay, so he's like just a couple years older than I
He's
am.
63.
Oh, 63. Okay. So he's not that old. And so he graduated and then he worked for a year out in LA as an English teacher. And then in 81, he moved to New York City to pursue a career in writing. And while he was doing that, he did journalism for about 3 years. And while he was trying to do that job, he worked as a taxi cab driver and a bartender. And what else did he do? And a janitor. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And then he basically only writes nonfiction. And the kind of book he likes to write are the true crime novels, criminal justice, or the American underworld. And this is a nonfiction book. So I was just really intrigued by it. When I was telling Jeff how much I like this book, he's like, well, didn't you watch Godfather too? No, I had not watched The Godfather when I went to Cuba. So, I mean, I knew something, about it, but just peripherally. And I learned a lot about it when I was there, but I was so hungry for more information when I came back, because they drove us past like burnt out casinos and the deserted racetrack. And that we were in the Hotel National and you see all these pictures of these gangsters where, Frank Sinatra and all these guys that had their meetings there. And it was just really fascinating. It is a truly fascinating place. It is like stuck in the 1959 era. That's kind of, where it is. So we were about a week in Havana. I loved Havana. And Havana, even today, you can see how grand it was. It's falling down. You can see that in the pictures. Everything needs a new coat of paint. We were told that every day a couple buildings fall. They just crumble. That was 5 years ago. I don't know if it's any better. I rather doubt it since Trump was in there for 4 years and he made things worse for them. They really liked Obama when I was there and they were hoping that the embargo was going to get lifted. And then, Trump took office and I just can't even imagine what they're going through there right now. So let's see. Havana.
Did anybody see the Anthony Bourdain episode on Cuba?
I probably did, but I don't remember it.
Maybe you can get it online or maybe CNN will rerun it. But that was great. They were talking about how the locals are starting of course, back then when he went there, they were starting sushi restaurants and they were really starting to really get more gourmet. And they were hoping that people would, paying customers would come.
Well,
and then there was COVID, right? So who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it was not a place to go for food. That is something that's how I felt. I mean, they had very few vegetables. They were just starting to be able to grow some in their yard. And if they grew more than they needed, that they could sell a little bit to make some money. They also had just gotten recently, back then, permission for some of the homes to have a little restaurant in the home. We went to a couple. And also there were, you could have permission to use a room in your house or a part of your house as kind of a pension sort of thing. And you had a little anchor outside your door if you were one of those places. I think one of the pictures I sent was, I hope it was part of it, was a mansion. And the whole first floor was really dilapidated. And people were living in there and hanging wash and everything inside. And there was this gorgeous staircase. Well, you could tell it had been gorgeous. went up to the second floor, and there was a restaurant up there, like a really fancy restaurant. And then looking out from there, still in that same building, like the back part of that building, there was all kinds of people living there, just like in the halls and stuff like that. So
Wow.
it's it's a mishmash. Yeah, I thought that this book had colorful prose. It sort of read like a fiction, except it was all true. And he has 45 pages of references in the back, which is pretty cool. So he did a lot of work on a lot of research. I have it written down here. Oh, he was driven to write this book by the knowledge that this was perhaps the last chance to tell the story using sources that were actually lived through the events.
Right.
And so he wanted, to have these interviews with people. And I think, I don't know how you guys felt about the book, but I found it, fascinating. And I didn't mind the, I think it could be very dry if it's just all factual, and I didn't find it to be dry. How did you guys feel about actually the prose?
It was excellent.
Riveting.
Yeah.
Riveting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like watching a movie. It really was.
Mhm.
It was very good.
Yeah.
At the end, I found myself wishing that he had written the rest of Fidel Castro's story.
Yeah.
Just because
Yeah.
I love the way he researched everything, and he kind of put
Yeah.
the collage together. I thought he did a terrific job.
Yeah, and in the end of the book, he goes sort of bullets, and he says what happened to Batista, what happened to Castro, what happened to, Lucky Lewinsky, and this and this and this. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's a shame that he didn't get to meet with Jaime,
Who?
Lansky's driver.
Uh,
Jaime.
Yeah.
Jamie.
He
Jamie.
died right before they were going to meet in person, and the book is dedicated to
It's
him.
dedicated to him.
He died.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but they were having email conversations, and I think they had a phone call, but they were supposed to meet, and he died right before, but he probably would have gotten even more detail.
Sure.
yeah. I know he does have some information from Jamie in there.
Oh yeah, there's
Lots.
a lot.
Plenty.
A lot
Yeah.
from his perspective.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. So Havana Nocturne is the first nonfiction English language attempt to tell the full story of the mob and the infiltration into Havana. He starts the book with what was sort of going on at the time. And it was post-World War II. The mob had made tons of money during Prohibition. And then when Prohibition was lifted, they had to kind of look around for some other way to make money. And Mayor, what's his last name? Lansky.
Meyer Lansky.
Yeah, Meyer Lansky. He had this dream, really, of having a country other than the US where he could, launder money, have investments, do gambling. They weren't into drugs at all. The mob. And he wasn't a murderer. He had other people do that for him, but he didn't do that himself. But he had this vision, that he oops, it's my phone. Sorry. He had this vision that he wanted to do this. And boy, for most of the 50s, they really succeeded. Sorry, hold on. Okay. Oh, let's see. I was amazed that the banks were involved in the schemes there. And that there was so much investment from US companies. Hershey was there, Kodak, the airlines were running deals to get people to go. It was being hyped by the hotels like the Hilton. Right. It was being hyped by the airlines.
Right,
And
Pan Am bought into one of those mob casinos.
yeah, yeah. And the banks, they got the banks were linked together with the financial operation of the mob. And it was, just amazing. So the mob came in and, they had this meeting with all the mob bosses from all over the country at the National, and decided to do this grand scheme. And there was all this development during that time. And it's all along the waterfront called the Malcon. And they had, lots of hotels and casinos going up, and they had all this gambling, and they had, the Tropicana and all the entertainment. It was all about sex, entertainment, gambling. And they were quite successful, and it was all linked together, and they couldn't have done it without Batista. So America was very pro Batista at the time, and it says he received 1.2 million like once a month, as skim off the top of the casinos. Castro is trying this whole time to make an impact in Cuba. He's intellectual. He's an attorney. He meets up with Che Guevara, who's a doctor, and they're in jail. And Batista at some point gives everybody amnesty and lets them out, and then they really get going. And they get up in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, and they were a very small group, but they, the people, the regular people were living in poverty. There was a small middle class. There's an area called Miramar in, right outside of Havana. We drove through it, where there's all these mansions. And when Castro came in, and all those people are the exiled people now in Miami, he turned all those homes into multi-family dwellings, or places where they'd have meetings, or officers' homes and stuff like that. He came in and nationalized everything. I was really interested in what was happening, and how Castro took small town by small town, and that at the heyday, the mob really wasn't even that aware, of it, because Batista controlled the newspapers, and he made it seem like they were doing fine, and they'd gotten this guerrilla or that guerrilla, and that the military had a handle on it. And so they just gradually made their way into town. I was thinking about typical book club questions. When I think about, we usually talk about different characters, and I don't know if that's even that interesting to do. I mean, I guess the main characters here are like Meyer Lansky, and Castro and Batista, and some of the Trafficante, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought Meyer Lansky was actually brilliant. I mean, he's not a nice guy, but I thought he was really clever and really, really smart, and a really good businessman. What did the rest of you think? He's a Russian Jew. Interesting, because most of the mob was Sicilian and not Russian Jews,
What was interesting, yeah, he ran it like a business.
Yeah.
You're right, he was like a CEO. And
Yeah.
frankly, CEOs are not nice people.
Yeah.
They didn't get to where they were by being charming. But he was very clear-eyed.
Mhm.
One of the, I do everything on Kindle, and one of the things is when I can look up something and I can see pictures. So going and seeing the pictures of Meyer Lansky.
Oh, I have, yeah. The book has pictures, yeah.
Okay.
Does it? Because it doesn't in the downloaded one.
Yeah, he was 5'4", and
But
They
it-
called
But
Oh, man.
Jakey, his brother Jakey was a very handsome dude, and it was very interesting. Yeah, and the girlfriends, there's pictures on the internet of all the girlfriends and the wives, and
yeah.
Batista, Lato Lindo.
Yeah, Batista was supposed to be a pretty good-looking man too. You know, and he
Batista,
had
yes,
come up-
he was called the beautiful mulatto.
yeah, and he came up through the military and then had a bloodless coup and then took over the country.
The Meyer Lansky, being a Russian Jew, so heavily involved with the Sicilians, but the Sicilians recognize, at least the TJ English lets us know that some of them said that without the Jews, the mafia would not have been what it was, how it had transformed. I mean, I think it was because of the Jewish intellect and the way of thinking about things. They wanted to get rid of that mustachioed Sicilian vendetta
Yeah.
sort of way of operating. And when you look at the names of the people, Norman Roth and
Hoffman.
yeah,
There's a
Rothman,
few.
there was Arnold, somebody. There were lots of Jewish actors in this criminal activity. So, and at the end, I couldn't believe when I read that the Sicilians said without the Jews being there, it would not have transformed the way it did.
Was that in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't remember reading that.
yeah, because it was cooperation, as you say, rather than vendettas and
Oh, right, absolutely. I mean, they did do some hits on some of the top people, but that was just to sort of clear the way for them to move forward with their operation. I enjoyed, what do you want to talk about, Batista or Castro, and how he doesn't talk a lot about Castro's personality in the book. I mean, if it would, the book would be twice as long if he went into Castro.
Oh, boy.
Oh, Jeff,
Wait, can't hear you.
Yeah, can't hear me now?
Well,
Can't hear me? Hello?
yeah. Go ahead.
Say it
No,
again.
I was looking forward to the Castro story. I think you came up a little short on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We were looking for more also.
I know.
He did cover it. He did cover it, but he was a little sparse with detail with Castro. I guess it's almost because Castro was not available.
Yeah.
And it will be another book.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
focused
probably.
on the mobs.
Well,
Yeah,
even
this was focused on the mob.
even if he restricted himself to that time period, Castro was not available for a lot of that time period. But he did cover him a little bit about the fact that he was fairly privileged. In fact, he talked about the fact that the privileged guy ends up being the leader of the people.
Yeah.
And the guys that really came from poverty ended up in bed with the mafia. It was just a crazy, ironic juxtaposition.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the intellectuals up in the mountains,
Right.
bearded and dirty.
The doctor and the lawyer are up in the mountains, right? And
There
the
is
sugarcane cutter is in a presidential palace.
Yeah. When I was there, I went into the Batista's presidential palace, and Castro turned it into a museum of his revolution. And it's all like there's bronzes of he and the three of them, he and Che Guevara and the other guy, skinny.
Rowell.
Yeah.
His brother.
Yeah, and newspaper clippings, and the whole thing is about Castro and the revolution, and it's in Batista's palace. It really kind of almost made me laugh when I was there. And there's a huge Cuban flag hanging in the window. It's a beautiful building. it's a beautiful building, and their capital is sort of a small but a copy of our Capitol building with the dome.
Oh.
Yeah, it was fashioned after that. There were a lot of people, movie stars, Sinatra, Marlon Brando, you know, a lot of people came to take part in the entertainment, but also to be entertainers there. And then I guess there were some politicians, because I know Kennedy went.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes, he did, didn't
Did.
he?
His orgy.
He
Had an orgy there. And Frank Sinatra was in a room with a couple women when a nun and some Girl Scouts
Yeah.
came in the room by mistake.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
That was so funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And wasn't there a bra hanging over a lampshade?
Yeah,
yeah.
more than one.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. And Castro and the people really started to hate the debauchery. You know, the mob, I think in the end of the book, English talks about the part that the mob and the corruption may have played in Castro's determination to have this revolution. It wasn't the only thing, because it had been going on a long time, but it was one of the motivators. Do you know what I'm saying? If it hadn't been for the mob as one of the factors, there may not have been the same kind of revolution. And the people were living in poverty, most of them, and the farmers, and they didn't have a good literacy rate at the time, and they didn't have enough food. And Castro came in and basically leveled the playing field. I really didn't know what to expect when I went to Cuba. I thought it was going to be horrible, that I was going to think Castro was all bad. And I didn't end up thinking that Castro was all bad. I mean, there was a lot of censorship. That was very obvious. And the infrastructure in Havana certainly needed help. But Castro didn't care about Havana at all. He thought Havana was like the playground of the devil. He basically wanted to abandon it, and didn't put any money or time into keeping it. In fact, the people rioted when they found out Batista had left. You know, he steals away in the middle of the night with zillions of dollars, and people are still partying, and Meyer Lansky gets wind of it, and he goes around to all the casinos trying to collect up all the cash.
Right.
Yeah. So what are some themes that you've come up with in the book?
What I found fascinating and disturbing at the same time, although I don't think I was surprised at all, but the U.S. involvement
Yes.
in everything,
Yeah.
whether it was U.S. involvement because the mobsters were from the U.S. or direct governmental interference, and reading the way some of these things were playing out, I couldn't help making connections to our current period in American politics. I couldn't help thinking about so many things about how it is very difficult for us as citizens of this country to really understand the truth, because you get such varying versions. And all of us, I don't think anybody here is too young, but all of us remember that time period in that that Cuban Revolution. And the slant that was taken at the time about Castro and about Batista, reading this just kind of, I guess it's trying to set the record straight.
Yeah.
If it is, but you do, when you step out of the United States, and mostly all of you are world travelers, and you know far better than I, that when you go to another country and meet the people and live there and experience it, you get a very different take than what the news tells you here in the US. And so, you know, when you talk about interesting characters, for me, the US stood as a character, whether it was the hearings and when English brought in those hearings and the kinds of questions they were asking, or CIA involvement, or when Kennedy went down, the Bay of Pig invasion, all of that. I mean, it was riveting. And as I said, it was disheartening.
Yeah.
It was disheartening.
I was surprised at the CIA involvement. Again, I probably just didn't know that much of the history, you know, before I went. But Carol.
It's like anybody brought up outside of the US would not be surprised.
Oh, that's, yeah.
You have to remember that Jack Kennedy's father was a bootlegger.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So it goes back and back and back and back.
Yeah.
You know, if American, you know, what's the saying you have? There's no constant allies, there's no constant enemies, there's only constant interests. It's to the US's interest to be there. They had the United Fruit, that was also South America, and on, and the sugar, etc., etc.
The incredible thing is how short-ranged all of those policies have always been with the US of A.
It's a very new country. You know, as I say,
right.
China, you ask the time, they look at a watch. You
That's
go
true.
to China, they look at a calendar.
That's true.
And if you are cycling every 4 years, that there is going to be a sharp break as opposed to an election called winners. It's going to be, you know, and I mean, I can tell you now, what you know, Trump, okay, already, let's take a deep breath and everything will be back because it's Biden. Let me tell you, the rest of the world is saying, yeah, but you had Trump and you could have him again in 4 years. Are we really going to trust you? You know, it really makes a difference.
Unfortunately, in the era that this book is written about, the only constant was probably J. Edgar Hoover.
Right. And the interesting thing is the FBI guy that they mentioned, well, I want to say Schlesinger, but it wasn't, it was Antinger, also cropped up.
Yeah, ANSLING.
Yeah, he cropped up in the movie Billie Holiday versus the US.
Was that right?
The FBI guy who went after Billie Holiday, you know, absolutely. Yeah, he was a driving force. Became a very powerful person in the FBI. Yeah, I mean, there's this, what, the 50s were very good here for most people, right? It was a
very period of calm in the US.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Right? Happy days.
That's true. Ozzie and Harriet.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
It was
Leave it to Beaver.
World.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when the small reference he was making, the English was making to Kennedy's assassination.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it sounded like the mob.
Yeah, definitely sounded. Yeah.
In the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'd heard that before.
Yeah.
A lot of traffic content.
Yeah.
Yeah, claiming that he had done. Yeah, that they were responsible. I haven't heard that verified too many other places, but. The thing I liked about earlier on, the way in World War II, the way the government came to Lucky Luciano and asked him to help them clean up the docks.
Yeah, it was the FBI.
Yeah.
That's why he got off and got out of jail, and you know they sent him off back to Italy, and then he secretly crept back to Cuba.
Yep.
Yeah.
And according to English, that was the the little moment in time that allowed all the rest of what happens in this book to happen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
I enjoyed the book. You know, there was a lot of historical references and names that I knew kind of.
Yeah.
And having been to Cuba, it's like, okay, could slot a lot in place in the Hotel Nacional, and
Mhm.
could imagine what it had been like. And it's like, frankly, out in the countryside, it's pretty god awful now. If I guess it was god awful then, maybe it's always been god awful.
Hmm.
And I don't know what the economy. I mean, the economy used to be sugar,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I don't know what it is now, because sugar is you can grow in a lot of other places, and they, you know,
Yeah.
the demand is.
About rum.
When I was there 5 years ago, there were all these empty fields, and outside of Havana, we were up and down parts of Cuba, and we were told that they never rotated their crops, and that the ground was really without nutrients.
The
Right.
sugar really destroys the soil.
Hmm.
They found that in Australia when I was there, and afterwards, you know, after their vaunted health system, they showed us all sorts of things, but we never saw a hospital or pharmacy or whatever. And later I found out that actually the major export was healthcare workers. And Venezuela had a ton of money and oil. So they were sending their doctors and nurses to Venezuela in return for dollars and oil.
Yeah. Well,
And-
they were first dependent upon the Russians for a long
Right.
time for their oil. And then in the 1990s, they had a terrible decade when the Cold War ended.
Right.
And they were really thrown into even more of a depression. And then finally they hooked up with Venezuela. But, you know,
That one's that that dog died.
yeah, I mean, they're really they have a very difficult life.
Yeah.
But I what I did like was that they have a 98% literacy rate. That everybody goes to school. Everybody goes to school for free. Everybody has basic rations. They have ration books, and they go so people aren't without food. They, you know, they can grow some vegetables, and they have a ration book, and they go to, I think I included, it looks like a store with hardly anything on the shelves in one of the
Yeah.
pictures. That's a store where they can go with their coupon books. And
Wow.
it's they'll have things out there to show you what they have, but they go in the back. That's where their stores are. Like you know, this is just an example out front of what they have.
Right.
Then they'll go in the back and get it.
And the shelves, one picture of your shelves said free, libertad. So in other words, those things on those shelves were free for the people to take.
Yeah.
The quota.
Yeah, they have the coupon books. They're not paying for that. They turn their coupon.
Okay, just the way I just zoomed in on the word on the shelves, and it looked like it was free items.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know what that actually said,
Yeah. But Karen, my question to you, because you've been there, and Carol also, do you think, I mean, Cuba has not been lifted out of its poverty or out of any of the problems that existed during the Batista regime anyway. Castro, I don't know, I'm just going by what I read in the book. It doesn't seem like much more has been accomplished. And my question to you is, do you think that that is because of the harsh embargo that the US imposed on Cuba, that these people can't get vegetables and they can't get certain supplies? Do you think that that's a possibility for the country?
Well, I think it's probably part of it, but I think it's more that there was a lot of repression from Batista and even Castro.
Yeah, but you would think that since Castro, when did he take over? 2000?
Yeah,
No,
but
19.
Nine.
Yeah, so you're right. So you would think that in the time that he was leading the people with all of his vision, that country would have been lifted. It has not been lifted.
I think
And
that
people are just political pawns, really, it seems.
Yeah.
but what would be the basis of the economy?
Right now,
Yeah, or
Uh,
ever.
well,
Tourism.
it was tourism.
Yeah.
If you know, when I was there, it was starting to open up, but I think it's closed down again. So
Hey, that is about all they have.
mhm,
Castro
mean-
burnt all the sugarcane fields.
They, but
not more.
the sugar market is like down a lot. There's a lot of, and it's really bad for the soil. The sugar prices are really down. There, I mean, other countries, there's all the sugar substitutes. You know,
Yeah,
it's a crop that nobody, really wants. They have, like you were saying about Miramar. I mean, it's the U.S. citizens can't go there on a general basis,
no.
but they do have a tourism industry because Canadians go there, Northern Europeans who will go anywhere cheap where they can sit on the beach. Now they're sequestered in the hotels.
Yeah.
It's everything is there. They don't go out and go and visit the island,
Mm-hmm.
but they get foreign currency that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the embargo has a lot of holes in it. I mean, families, members go back and forth to Miami. So the little restaurants that were starting up there, I mean, you can't buy spices or anything. I love Cuban food, but the Cuban food I've had has been in Cuban restaurants from people living here who were Cuban. And the food there was crap. It was sad.
Yeah, the food in Cuba was definitely not the draw.
But we went to several little restaurants, private restaurants, and there were family members that would come over and their luggage was filled with spices and food, and so they could put half a decent meal together. But I'm not saying the Hotel Nacional. I was killing for a Cuban sandwich,
Yeah.
the pleca, and it's like, no,
Well,
that was at Miami Airport.
Yes, exactly. That is the only place I saw a Cuban sandwich. It was.
But that's the thing. I mean, the families can bring things or send things back, but there is really nothing significant, substantial
Right, you can't
to
bring a
really
refrigerator.
galvanize this economy. And I don't know, maybe the United States wants it that way.
Maybe what?
I said maybe the United States wants it that way.
I don't know.
I would never have thought that, but now I'm questioning.
A weak country 90 miles off our shores. But can I ask a question? Did or did not the author, English, make the point that Castro decided once he landed and the whole revolution quote began, didn't he decide that it was in his political interest to be rather duplicitous and give interviews that said one thing about capitalism and what was going to happen in the country and whatnot? And then when he actually got into power, he killed everybody that he thought might be potential opposition.
Yeah.
And essentially, he just repeated what had been happening in Cuba for generations. Am I right about that? Or did English say something that I misunderstood?
Well, there was, I mean, Castro started out, I think, with good intentions, and then he took on Marxism. He took on Marxism, and he wanted just to be in power, and so he was repressive. What he did do, which I was surprised at, is that everybody has free health care. Everybody goes to school and they have a high literacy rate. Everybody has some food. They're not starving, but when I was there, unless you were in the tourist industry, and they were doing okay at the time, anybody like the taxi cab drivers or the tour operators of the hotels, unless you were in that industry, you were really hurting.
Okay.
I got the impression,
But you make a very good point, though. At the very least, he raised the floor.
He helped.
The worst of the people in Cuba had it better than they did before he was there.
Yes, they did. He nationalized everything, and he took back all the companies, and he closed all the casinos, and then he opened them again because the economy was tanking. But then he had to close them again, and his speeches could be 3 hours long. When I was there, they were telling us that Castro, he was very eloquent, but he would 2 or 3 hours. He would just be talking and talking and talking. He liked to hear himself think. I mean, it was very narcissistic. You could tell by Batista's palace, it was all about Castro, Castro, Castro. But I was impressed that they had national health care, high literary rate, and that people had basic food. And that the people at the very bottom were raised up some.
Yeah.
The exiles, the people with money, they left. And that's the people in Miami that I guess give money to the Republicans and have a lot of power to some degree. There was a quote somewhere that I found rather sad. The exiles continued to dream of the day when they would return to Cuba and reclaim all that they had lost.
Yep.
Yeah, and
that's the fundamental reason for being.
Yes, they really still believe that they can do that. So when I was looking at themes, I thought of capitalism,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, corrupt capitalism.
Capitalism, corruption.
It's not like mom and pop starting a business.
No.
And under Castro, mom and pop really couldn't start a business.
Exactly.
Right. Well, Batista, though, basically sold the resources of his country to the United States. All these companies came in and used up the resources, but the money didn't go back to the people.
No.
It got skimmed off for the politicians and the mob and back to the U.S. corporations.
No.
It wasn't going to the people
Never.
at all. The poor people were worse off under Batista than they were under Castro.
That's true.
The literacy rate was terrible when Batista was in power, and now it's 98%.
Right. I mean, if people had to make a living having sex in front of an audience, that's say about their other employment options.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what they're doing now. I do know that it's not that easy to get out of the country. I mean, Carol, you're saying people come back and forth, to Miami, but honestly, I saw lines every day outside of the office where people were waiting to try to get a visa.
No, it's not that the people in Cuba are going to Miami. It's the relatives in Miami will come in from time to time. Now, whether they can still do that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Alabama, they were, yeah.
Back in when you were there. Yeah. There were long lines every day, and some of the people never got into the building of trying to get out of the country, but they had to make sure that you were coming back. You were not allowed to leave unless they were sure you were coming back. And my guide was a young woman, and she said, they'll never let me leave. I'm young, I don't own real estate. I'm not married, I speak English, and I'm educated. They know that if they let me leave, I won't come back.
Right.
So they would never let her leave. It's the older people who have family in Cuba and a home or a spouse or something like that. Maybe they'll let you go because they know that you're invested and you'll come back.
It'll be like Russia. You couldn't leave Russia on a visa unless you were married and had a child, and the child would stay behind.
Mhm.
There was always a hostage. It's one of the wonderful things of Marxism. I don't know whether it was in his,
And what?
I don't know whether that was in his manifesto or not, but that was what they did. I mean, all the Soviets in the UN all had children who stayed behind to make
Yeah,
sure they
wow.
went back.
I was, when Karen was describing the condition of these mansions with multiple families living in them, I was remembering Dr. Zhivago, and after the revolution, how those wealthy homes were converted into multi-family complexes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's very, very similar.
Yeah, and I can understand the people that lived in those homes. They thought when they left that this was that a lot of people thought, the mob thought too, that Castro was going to be a flash in the pan, that he'd be like everybody else and just give it a little time and he'll be gone.
Mhm.
Well, he made it through 10 presidents, like, and there were so many assassination attempts, and the United States was behind a lot of that.
Mhm.
And the CIA, which I don't know, Carol, you wasn't shocked, but I was just shocked at the involvement of the CIA and the FBI in Cuba. And the people in Miami, the exiles, were angry with Kennedy because he didn't support the Bay of Pigs with airplane support. It's just, yeah, it's really amazing that country is only 90 miles away from Florida, and it's so different from us.
Yeah.
But in the Caribbean generally, it's, I mean, unless you're the Cayman Islands and you're there washing money, or it's very hard in those islands, absent tourism, to have a viable economy.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah,
don't have something that you can trade with the rest of the world. The rest of the Caribbean, they trade sunshine, beautiful water, and
but they're not as restricted as the people in Cuba. They can come and go, whereas the Cubans
they
can't.
figured out a way that where at least they make the money.
Jeff, mute yourself.
What?
Mute. Can I mute him? I don't know. Oh, there he goes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of censorship in Cuba that's not in some of the other Caribbean islands.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's definitely a very repressive, and it learned a lot from Russia.
Yes.
And like our driver, there's a certain segment of the population, you can tell out there, they're Ivan, Igor, Boris, they're
Oh, yeah.
were influenced by the Russians. The Russians were seen as the great deliverance. They were pouring shed loads of money into Cuba because, it was a great vantage point for them militarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when they stopped, it all just
Yeah.
went into the toilet.
Yeah. I mean, the Cuban people were very vocal about the 90s and what happened to them. I mean, they were starving after Russia pulled out. They didn't even have any fuel for their tractors. So even when we were there 5 years ago, there was a lot of horses that were doing the work in the field because they didn't have fuel for their tractors. And they had big main roads outside of Havana, and there'd be nobody on it. And then you'd see along the shoulder of the road, maybe a horse pulling something or a mother pushing a baby in a carriage. But there wasn't that much fuel for them to.
I don't know if you could tell, but I'm very curious. Do you think that there was any kind of backlash among the populace regarding communism and the support that Russia had given and given and given and then withdrawn, or not really? Or could you tell at all?
I I couldn't tell. I just know that they were very vocal about when Russia pulled out, how for a whole 10 years, they went down. Their standard of living went way down. They were really, really hungry, poverty stricken. They didn't have fuel. They didn't have food. You know, they were really in a hard place.
I guess my thought is, did it occur to some folks there that this imperialistic country 90 miles to the northwest of them was no worse or better than any other country? It's all self-interest. Do they realize
the United States? With the United States, is that what you're saying? Is no better than?
Yeah, that the United States is no better or worse than a country like Russia, which it's all self-interest.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, during the 50s, when the mob was there, the United States was heavily invested in Cuba and all the development that was going on, which looked, you know, great from the outside.
But he makes the point, English, that they weren't invested in Cuba; they were invested in the mob.
Well, oh, I know, but there were still buildings going on up, and there were some, you know, jobs and
Fun.
But it was only Havana and the rich that were really benefiting from that.
Yes, and that was Castro's. That was, you know, Castro's one of his issues, and the morality of it too.
Right. Now, I'd like to make a point, and I don't want it to come across as if I'm advocating for the mob being there. I just want to make the point that for the mob, if they had remained in power the way they were, like if the revolution hadn't happened, eventually especially if they had minds like Meyer Lansky continuing, eventually they would have to get out into the populace, because they would have to train people. They would recognize the benefits of getting better infrastructure so that the tourists coming in could get from point A, from the airport to the city or out into the country to do sightseeing. I think the long-term thinking of people like Lansky might have gone out into the country. I mean, there's no way of knowing that.
Yeah.
At this point.
I think Lansky's plan, was Havana, and then it was to go on to other countries like Dominican
and
Republic.
not worry about Cuba.
Right, exactly.
Right, because they didn't want people to go sightseeing. They wanted them to continue to be in the casino losing their money, or spending money in the bars to watch Desi Arnaz.
Yeah, the sex shows. They just,
18 hours a day. That's what they wanted. They didn't want them to leave Havana.
Yeah, they wanted them all in Havana, and then his grandiose ideas were really to take it to other islands, you know.
Right. Well, wasn't that the start of like the all-inclusives, like at all the Caribbean islands, in Nassau and Jamaica?
I don't know. Was it? I don't know that.
Yeah.
It was mob related?
I don't think it was mob related. I think it was psyche related. Fun, sex. You know, a place to get away from the stress of 9 to 5.
And you don't have to leave the property.
Right.
That's what I meant by the all-inclusive.
Yeah, you stay in the one place and you don't go out anywhere else.
Yeah.
Right. And then you do
So
go
that
out
was
and
the
you realize that
beginning
all
of
the natives
sandals
hate Americans.
I'm sorry, what? You were all talking at once?
That was the beginning of the trend of vacationing, such as sandals.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I hadn't equated the two. What were you saying, Barbara?
So if you do go beyond sandals at those resorts, you see that people really hate Americans.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I went to sandals in Jamaica decades ago, and I got a taxi for a day to drive us around the island and go to some markets and stuff like that. And I didn't feel that they hated us, but it was the first time I ever saw children begging.
Yeah, we saw that in Mexico also.
Yeah.
As soon as we would open the door of the vehicle, the adorable little girls had done all this embroidery work. I think I came home from Mexico with 37 handkerchiefs.
Oh,
Yeah.
One little girl was cuter than the next.
Yeah, I'll have to
I don't
say,
have
I
friends
did not see begging in Cuba. I did not see street people in Cuba. They were, I don't know where they were, but they weren't begging and they weren't living on the streets. They might have been living like in that restaurant that was in the second floor, and the downstairs was all, you know, multiple families hanging their wash inside, and beautiful sculptures that were broken and stuff. I mean, not a way I would want to live, but they had a roof over their head.
We went to a supposed to be a senior center,
Yeah.
and so the elderly people, you know, like a barrack, came in and they were dancing, and then our guide was actually the daughter of a diplomat, a Cuban diplomat. So she was in the top tier. So she landed this very cushy job.
Yeah.
And she kept an eye on us. I mean, it was like, don't stray.
Yeah.
You know, it was it's like,
well, on the tours, they take you where they show you what they want you to see. But we did have some free time, and we walked up and down the side streets, and you know.
Well, I haven't finished with the senior center. We were talking.
Sorry.
I don't think the guide had expected us to be able to. Quite a few people spoke pretty good Spanish, so we were chatting with them. And I was chatting with this older guy, and I said, "Well, you know, so you come here like every day?" And he said, "No, they send the bus for us for the tourists. Then we come. Then they give us, you know, our dinner. Then they take us home. They were props for the show."
Yeah.
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 They, you know, it was like,
yeah.
and the guide couldn't control that there were like, you know, 10 different conversations going on, and she couldn't just give us the, you know, the official story that this is this wonderful senior center and everybody has a wonderful time here. No, they don't. It's like, you know, yeah, no, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've run across that in other parts of the world. Karen, when you went to India, I'm sure you experienced that kind of thing.
No, there's so many people in India, and there's the caste system, and there's people living on the streets. I mean, really living, like doing everything in life on the streets. And
it's hard to hide them.
No, there's nowhere that you can't hide them.
That's what I'm saying. It's hard to hide them.
Yeah, there was nowhere. And on Semester at Sea, you know, we weren't being taken to places that were examples of something good. We, you know, that the whole thing was to see the real people of the country. So, you know, we were kind of in the nitty gritty. India's, I've been there 3 times now, and I'd go back again, but it is a hard place to go.
You don't want to now.
It bombards your senses. And no, not now. They're in a terrible mess now, but yeah. I do want to tell you about one of the pictures that I sent you guys of all the books. This was, we had free time, and we were told that in this park that they were going to have like a bookmart kind of thing. And I thought, oh, well, that's cool, you know, a flea market / book sale. And we walked all around the entire park, and the only thing for sale was propaganda. That was it. Propaganda, books about Castro, books about Che Guevara. You'll see in that picture. It was a really good example of the censorship. And there was only one newspaper, and it was completely controlled by the government. They weren't getting, I don't think at that time, 5 years ago, that the general population had access to the internet. We stayed in a lovely hotel in Havana. I really thought we could be in some dilapidated place. I didn't know where we'd stay, but it was a Spanish chain. So there are other countries, not just, the US isn't, but other countries are doing some investment in Cuba. I don't know what's happened in the last 5 years, but we stayed in a lovely hotel. I think the lobby of the hotel is one of the pictures I sent.
What was the name of the hotel?
It starts with an I, and it's a Spanish chain.
Iberia.
Interstar or
Yeah.
I can't remember. But I've heard that name. I guess they have them in other countries too, this chain. And so, yeah.
I think it's called the International.
No, it wasn't the International. No. And the cars, that's another thing that I thought I knew I'd see some old cars. I thought maybe 1 in 10 cars might be an old car. When I looked out my window of the hotel the first day, I couldn't believe my eyes. It looked like an antique car show.
In Argentina.
There was maybe 1 car out of 10 that wasn't from the 50s.
No.
If they could ever get those cars to the United States, they'd make a bundle on them.
You're not kidding.
But
Classic cars.
yeah, I mean, they were beautiful classic cars. Now, not all of them were beautiful, but they can't even get parts. So a lot of times they're just making parts. When the parts wear out, they're making parts and trying to keep these cars going. There are some Russian cars there too that just look like little boxes, but there was a lot of American cars, just normal cars on the road from the 50s.
It's the graveyard for the Yugo. You remember those?
Yeah, the Yugo, sure.
Yeah, well, they
Yes.
shipped a lot of Yugos to Cuba.
Yes, there were a lot of Yugos, but there was a lot of like
Oh,
Bel Airs and Chevrolets and,
Oh, absolutely. They're, these guys' pride and joy. And that's a way of, when they have tourists, of making some money riding you around.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, just being on the roads, you could see that it wasn't just for tourists. It was like that was the only car they had.
Right. The roads were empty.
The roads were empty. The roads were really empty. It was shocking.
And I didn't see a gas station. I was looking for hospitals, gas stations. It's like, no, there aren't any.
Yeah. Well, I did see a clinic. They didn't take us to a hospital, but I know that everybody has medical care, and I know that they train a lot of doctors there, but then they send them out to other countries.
Right. They're a commodity. And in fact, our group, they asked us they sent us lists of over-the-counter medications, Band-Aids and antibiotic ointment and all the rest. And that's what goes to the clinics.
Oh, they wanted you to bring it?
Oh, yes.
Oh, we didn't do that. No.
Oh, yeah. And we went to a school, and the kids are lovely, and they all wore school uniform.
Yeah.
And they had this computer center, and they were like the old green screens, and they weren't on the internet. And I thought, oh, these poor babies, they're like 30 years behind.
Mm-hmm.
But the kids were lovely, and they were smart.
Yeah.
And we went to a church, and it was very clean. The statues were all painted. Everything was immaculate inside. And, you go into church, I don't care what denomination, there's kind of stuff laying around. There's books and prayer books and hymn books and brochures and whatever. There was nothing. There were a few candles lit for show. And it's the only church I've ever been to in any country whatsoever that did not have a board with the times of the services and what was coming up. It was like, oh, this is for show. Yes. And a few weeks later, the Pope went. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's all nicely painted up for you. But it's not a real church. And we went to a synagogue that wasn't a real synagogue.
Wow.
And the guy, it was, I'm not Jewish, but I know what a synagogue looks like. And there was nothing in there. And again, he was taking donations and all of the medical stuff. And somebody said, "Oh, you're a rabbi." And I go, no, but you know, we have freedom of we can be religious here. And it's like, yeah, no, you can't. And it was like a little tourist thing.
Yeah, well, I don't know. 5 years ago, I don't think I felt quite as confined as what you're describing. I didn't feel like everything was for show. We did go to a senior center, however, and that was probably for show. And we did go to a school, and the kids, they had a guitar choir or orchestra or something. It was all guitars, and they played for us. And then a big rainstorm came, and we were stuck in there for about an hour longer than we should have been. And it was wonderful because they were done playing. And so one of their leaders said, well, why don't you ask the Americans, the tourists, some questions? And so the children started asking us questions, and they wanted to know what we did for a living. And one girl worked for Netflix, and they were like, oh, Hollywood. You know, I mean, they were just so innocent and lovely and curious.
Well, that would be my next question. How do the people earn a living there? What do they do? I mean,
Not much.
what kind of work are they doing to earn their money?
I don't know. There's fishermen.
Yeah.
There are some farmers, but you know, there's not much, you know, in the way of farming going on or agriculture. There is a big focus on music and art.
Well, that's based on what we read. That's been traditional.
Yeah, that's their culture.
Yeah, and you know what? If they could get a handle on that, and I mean, I think that in itself would be big for them. But it's interesting to me that both you and Carol, when you went on your tours, the places that you were led to. I mean, when you think about tours that you've taken in other countries, do you go to schools? Do you go to senior centers?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I've not been on a tour like that. I've not.
OAT always goes.
OAT, Road Scholar, they take you
Okay.
to
Overseas adventures travel. They do that.
everything, controversial lectures,
Yeah,
political lectures, government,
Yeah, the politics,
houses,
you know,
everything.
yeah, what's going on in the country at the time,
Okay.
orphanages. Yeah.
Okay.
It was interesting, like, you know, I took umpteen pictures in Cuba, and you take the picture of what they want you to take the picture of, because there's this house and this park, which is all newly painted, only nobody's in there, and they've got it all, you know, but you turn the camera like 45 degrees or 90 degrees, and you see, you know, things that are falling down. This poor spavined horse, which obviously isn't getting enough to eat. You know, it looks like something out of the 1300s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, oh my God, you know, it's
Yeah, most of my pictures that I took, and maybe I'll send you guys some more, were not of things that were painted, newly painted and looking good. You know, that just didn't interest me very much. I really wanted to see how the real people lived.
I would love to see that, Karen, if you could share.
Yeah, sure, I'll send more. Mhm.
Really, really love to see that.
Mhm. Does anybody have any more thoughts about the book itself?
I want to talk about the mob.
Well, the mob, that was what the whole book was about.
Yeah, I want to talk about the mob only because I grew up in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
In that whole era where those names, and I am not kidding you, they were a household.
Oh, see, I never even heard of those names growing up.
Okay, so all right, and And when I'm reading this stuff in the book, that was real for me.
Wow.
All of it was real.
Huh.
The racketeering, the rackets, the Anastasia, Joe Bonanno, all those names, all in the neighborhood
Stassi.
I grew up.
That's what I just said.
Wow.
So it was like, I think that's partially why the book was so riveting. More it was the way the author chose to frame it. It was a beautifully written book.
Yeah.
But those names were real to me. The whole time period was real. And Lucky Luciano,
Yeah.
I swear my father had a library of material about Luciano.
Wow.
I don't know why. One of my sisters and I were talking the other day, and we were saying, do you think Dad was connected to the mob? Because it was all this stuff that we could not explain. And I'm hearing these names and reading it in this book, and I'm thinking, oh boy.
What did your sister say?
She was in agreement with me. She is much younger than I am. She's the same age as my daughter. And she had the same vibe from him that he may have been connected. We don't know, and I don't want to say bad things because he's gone.
Yeah.
I don't want to make any comments about him. But I remember that my mother knew about all the rackets, Al Anastasia, all the guys in Long Island. All those New York gangsters were household names in my house.
Wow.
You know? And so, I'm reading this, and it's like not reading about my family, but just reading about a culture in which I grew up.
Yeah.
And my mom used to say to me when I would be afraid to walk on the streets, because when I would come home from school, and I hope I don't misrepresent how I'm saying this, but I was in first grade, and there were this trio of Black children who would bully me when I would walk home from school. And they would call me names, and they would like hit me and stuff like that. And my mother would say to me, you don't ever have to worry about being safe in our neighborhood. You go to this address on President Street, you talk to so-and-so, you'll be fine. We never went that way because we went to the principal of the school instead. But that was the way it was handled. Like if there was going to be trouble in the neighborhood, we knew who the people were who were going to keep our neighborhood.
You were protected. Yeah.
Yeah. And so reading this in the book, it's like, okay, yeah, it's all familiar. I understand all of that.
I didn't hear about any of this until she threatened me with the marriage proposal.
Let me tell you, Philadelphia, South Philly had its own share of mafia.
Philadelphia was not mentioned until
Philadelphia was not mentioned in the book.
No, it was not mentioned until like if the book was 325 pages.
Yeah, he got half a
309.
Yeah. Very.
But wait a minute, we finally got there, and it was Angelo Bruno's father.
Okay. Joe Kennedy got mentioned though a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he should.
Yeah.
He was notorious.
Yeah.
He got kicked out of the UK.
What?
Yeah.
Kennedy.
He was ambassador.
He was ambassador. He was withdrawn. He got kicked out.
Yeah.
He was very pro-Nazi.
Yeah, he was another one that backed the wrong horse.
Yeah.
British, like, you're going to England and you hate the British.
Yeah.
It's going to go down really, really well.
Yeah.
What
What else about the mob? Does anybody else have that same experience or similar experience to Terry?
I just want to tell you that it's a sense that I picked up in the book, and maybe I carry it inside, that it was filtered into it was put into my head that the mob did good things for the people.
Mhm.
You know, that there were things that they were doing that made life better for poor people.
Was that the Castro mob or the Batista mob?
No, I'm talking in Brooklyn, where I was born.
I'm kidding.
No, I'm just saying. So, you know, when I'm looking at this, and maybe that's why I'm thinking maybe when Meyer Lansky, if he had a little bit more, you know, he might have done more for the people, because I could see the brutality, the mob hits, because I lived 2 blocks away from the waterfront. Do you remember the movie The Waterfront, where Marlon Brando was in there?
Yeah.
I lived 2 blocks away from that. My father used to work there, and he would say he quit the docks because he saw too many hits, and he went into the trucking, the Teamster union.
Oh, well,
But
they were all.
they were just as
Big
much into the
upgrade.
mob.
Oh, yeah, they were. Yeah. Wow.
So, but what I'm saying is that it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
You feel like they do some good things, but then they take away. They give with one hand and take away with the other. And they don't just take away, they brutalize you.
Yeah.
Brutalize you.
And
so
that
I
could-
don't have any affection for them. I'm not saying that I have any affection. I'm just saying that that's what you hear.
And when you think about it, that could be the story of Batista or Castro.
Yeah.
Right.
What they give you with one hand,
They
take away so much
Yes.
with the other. And it could be the same story with either of those dictators, but different with each of them. But at least, as you said, Karen, at least the floor of the most poverty-stricken people in Cuba is a little bit higher. If they can read, that
98%.
someday they'll have a chance, maybe.
I would love to see, I don't know if it'll happen with Biden, but I would love to see the embargo lifted, and I would love to see.
Oh, it should be. Yeah.
Oh,
My God, it's been since 59, right? I mean, it's just terrible. It's
what's the point? Like, really? In this
Yeah,
time,
really. What is
the point
Why
of
not?
that?
Why not try to turn these people into friends instead of enemies?
And
Yeah.
you know, you've got a highly educated group there. I mean, they're very smart.
Yeah.
As you know, I was very impressed with the kids and
Mhm.
their teachers. I mean, God love them. They are pushing on ropes because
Yeah.
you know that you taught these children, and then as adults, what on earth are they going to do?
Right.
I mean, they don't have
They can't
access
get
to
it
like,
up.
right?
You know, a lot of people that are really bright in other countries come to the United States. These people can't leave.
That's right.
Right.
That's true.
And the U.S. is the only country that can't visit.
Mhm. Mhm.
They say you know, people from Germany, Britain, Sweden. I mean, they'll go anywhere where it's cheap and there's sun. They, you know, and cheap beer.
Well, I mean, I hope for Cuba's sake that there are people coming there, you know, for
Well-
vacation, but I don't know. I think the tourist industry probably went down a bit after Trump came in, at least from the American standpoint.
Well, from the Americans, but it would have been still the Europeans. But with COVID, nobody's leaving anywhere.
Right.
No,
Right.
I mean, there's no planes.
Big hit with COVID.
Yeah.
Big hit. Yeah, it's really-
Barbara?
Yep.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say goodnight, but I have a very important question. What is our next book?
Yes.
I don't know.
Heather is doing it. The homecoming or the homegoing?
I think it's homecoming. Yeah, homecoming in
Home-
June.
Oh, homegoing.
Homegoing, Sheila.
Really?
And,
Yeah, it's homegoing.
And
But you guys asked.
is that by the Ghanaian Gyasi?
Yeah, it's an African writer.
Sounds right.
Okay. All right.
And I
Homecoming.
have to ask all of you before Barbara, you leave. I had so that would be June. July selection was still not identified, and I'm facilitating.
Carrie, TBD.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So the Monday after book club, or the Friday after book club in April, I gave my title to Judy, but she has not yet informed all of you. Here's what I'm thinking, and I'm willing to change it if you don't think it would be something fun or interesting to discuss. The book is called The Pat Conroy Cookbook. So ostensibly it's a cookbook, but in reality it is a series of essays by a writer who is very prolific here in the Low Country. I've read many books by him. Many of his books have been turned into films, including Prince of Tides and The Great Santini, Conrack, you know, a number of books that he's written. And so you get a lot of content as well as these recipes. And so I thought, some of you I've gotten to know personally, and it seems that you have a little interest in cooking, and maybe that you would like to explore this. If you think it'll be a dud, I'll change it.
No, we will read whatever anybody. It's
All
fine.
right, well, Carol, that's your opinion. Let's hear what somebody else has to say. I don't know. Barbara?
Well, just remember, if you don't want this book, you have to not only say you don't like cooking, but you don't like eating.
No, but the book is well written. Let me tell you.
What percentage of recipes?
Wait,
What percentage of recipes versus the percentage of book? I mean,
I would say
a couple of hours discussing the amount of flour that goes in.
no, not at all. Not at all. And I would never lead a discussion going that way. But I would say
It's 3 cups of flour.
At least a quarter of the book is probably delegated to the recipes. So 75% of the book is Pat Conroy discussing his experiences, what, you know, in his life. And so to answer your question, that would be the percentage.
What's the name of the book, Terry?
It's called the Pat Conroy Cookbook.
The Pat Conroy Cookbook.
Yeah.
Okay.
How I cooked my father.
What's that, Carol?
How I cooked every one of his books seems to be about how much he hates his father.
And you're absolutely right. That comes through.
That's interesting.
It comes through
Wow.
in this one. But his internationalism comes in a little bit more because of his experiences in France and in Italy and whatnot. As I said, I am open to trying something completely different. But because I am here in South Carolina, every time, like Karen, when Karen goes someplace, she wants to read about the place.
Yeah.
I immerse myself in Pat Conroy when I come here. And maybe that's why he was on my mind. But I have other options if you don't think.
Know him?
Yeah, it's a tie.
I think it'll be fine.
It's fine.
It's
fine. And Sheila, what are your thoughts?
Oh, that's fine with me. I've been doing a lot of cooking.
And Sheila, what do you think?
Sounds like a good summer read, and we both love to cook, and it sounds a little bit light. And
it is light,
very interesting.
But it's interesting. And believe me, when I start the facilitation, it'll get deeper.
Okay.
No problem. Count us in.
It won't be about flour, Barbara.
Okay, so when you're cooking for your father, then you add some poison.
Yeah. A little cyanide.
Not poison, just an emetic.
Little X-lax.
Homeopathic.
Great to see you all, and it's great to be back. And
it's great to have you. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, Karen. Great job. Love the book.
Oh, I just want to end with one quote, okay? Today's Cuba bears the ghosts of capitalistic exploitation, the rebel agenda of Fidel Castro, and years of enmity with the United States. And I think that that's still true.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excuse me, absolutely.
And I will send more photos.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Karen, you did a great
I
job.
don't know why you didn't get it.
Good job, Karen. Great book.
It was a great book.
Excellent read.
I'm glad you liked it. I thought maybe it would be boring because it was about the book. I found
No,
it fascinating.
definitely not. Definitely not. It was
wonderful.
riveting.
Oh, great.
All right,
Okay. All right. Good night.
Good
Bye,
night,
everybody.
Bye.
Take care. See ya.
Okay.
Good.